In this brand new episode of the Hart Hustle podcast, I sit down with Nick Roberts, the Dean of Students from Southern Virginia University. Now, guys, today's going to be an amazing episode because you're going to learn what it truly means to be a leader in the changing landscape of higher education, what it means to meet prospective students and the future generations of leaders where they are with making gigantic decisions. We're going to talk about mindset, mental health, what it means to overcome challenges in our lives, and the true definition of grit. Today's going to be an amazing episode. Let's stop wasting time. Let's get into it. Enjoy this conversation with Nick Roberts.
Education should be the atmosphere where learning across the board happens organically and specifically to the student. And so those opportunities should be able to happen for students all the time, where they can sit in the classroom and they can say, you know what, this is a very interesting class. Maybe I would like to pursue this. But if you don't have that overall opportunity, sometimes students just don't know. So like you said, so it sounded like you pivoted 4 times, right? You're like,
yeah, I did. My parents hated me for it.
And I think that's normal for a lot of students. But it's taking that chance to say, hey, what if I tried this? And what I love about the higher education setting is if it allows for those opportunities to happen, then students can really find what they want to do and be 4 or 5 years down the road.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hart Hustle podcast. I'm incredibly excited because I've got my good friend Nick Roberts here with me today. Now, Nick, you hold a unique position in society today. You are a higher ed leader. You are the Dean of Students at Southern Virginia University, man. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey, Keenan, thanks for having me, and happy to have a nice discussion with you today.
Man, this is going to be a cool conversation because we're going to talk about, the current state of higher ed, leaders and leadership for the next generation of people who are coming into the space. But also, I want to learn a little bit more about your backstory. Coming from our generation, I see similarities in our age. And I know that you're the leader of a higher ed institution, and you're really kind of playing the shaman, the guide, the connector, the enablement platform leader to put people in this next generation into the next phase of their life. And that's absolutely amazing. But how did we actually get here, man? Let's dive a little bit more into your origin story, because I know this is not how you exactly started off.
No, and I appreciate that. For me, higher education, even working in education, was not an option at all. Even getting an education wasn't really much of a plan, not something as a priority. But I actually started in social services, wanted to be in a role that I could help individuals, work with some people, kind of make a difference in the community type of feel, and enjoyed that work, enjoyed being part of the community, but felt that there's a lot of programs and things that are beneficial to individuals, but I wanted to do more. And so I saw education as maybe that area to where I could do more, help out more. So I went to school, and just like everyone else, I'm a first generation graduate that saw education as an opportunity for, okay, what could happen if I did this, right? So, I, like a lot of students I work with, I was there one day, like, what is this going to do for me? What doors could this open up? And slowly but surely transitioning from that social service environment to education, I saw roles that would be a good fit for me and what I'm good at, and then to be able to help others. And it just kind of snowballed into where we're at now with additional education, and now, at that higher ed level where I'm helping students every day.
What are you good at, Nick?
Oh, man. Well, if you ask my kids, I'm good at making sure they don't do what they're supposed to. But honestly, I love building rapport with students. I love being able to be on their playing field and understand how can I help them accomplish their goals, meet their needs. I really enjoy that day-to-day interaction. And so for me, building rapport, getting to know students, I feel like I can be that that guide almost. Coached for several years in different capacities, and there's that same coaching mentality of wanting to be able to support, to get better, to have that progress. And so those are some strengths that I really see myself having and using with students I work with every day.
Do you get a lot of pride in pouring into others around you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think coming from social services, it's kind of a thankless job where not a lot of people appreciate the work that you do, but it's so needed and it's so important. Sometimes education can be like that. We've seen that, recently with a lot of turnover and the things within education. Teachers have such an important role in our society, and yet sometimes I think we take for granted, the roles that they have and just the jobs that they do. But I appreciate the opportunity to work with anyone, and right now working with college students is something that I find a lot of fulfillment and joy, because you get the sense of taking them from point A, and you can see them kind of being lift off to that next journey that they're going on, and having a little part of that is always helpful for me in my work, because it's working, something's going well for them.
One of the things I think about is the reputation of higher education over the last, let's call it 5 years, has dramatically changed.
Yeah.
Right. When we were coming up through school, I remember my parents hammering into me, the only way you're going to be successful is by going to higher education, getting your education, going into a field of your choice, and then being able to stick it out long enough to build a career that is fulfilling. But since the pandemic occurred, we've seen a lot of noise and maybe misconceptions that are being spread about higher education. What's kind of the sentiment from your perspective with incoming students and the overall student body?
Well, especially coming from the pandemic, a lot of people, struggled going and moving on to higher ed or that next level of education. And so, excuse me, maybe that transition that, hey, I could really do it. It's an easy transition from high school to college. There is a misconception that, oh, you'll just be able to get right in. We know that a lot of students struggle in coming out of high school with just the basic reading levels, and being able to be proficient at say at 12th grade reading level. And so we have students that, nationwide, that are struggling just to read. And then of course they're going to struggle at the college level. Some misconceptions with school are always interesting, that it's the end all be all, that because I have a degree, now I've made it in life. And like you said, a college degree had a lot of weight, and it should have a lot of weight. There's a lot of work and there's a lot of emphasis that's put into obtaining that degree. But it doesn't mean that it's the only thing that you then accomplish and then that's it, that you're guaranteed a job because of that. Or another one that I hear is that whatever major you pick right out of high school has to be the major that you stick with that whole time. Just in life, education is about pivoting and trying to find that best balance for you. A lot of 18, 19-year-olds don't know what they want to do. They have an idea, but they're still trying to figure it out. So there's some misconceptions that because you pick one path that you have to stick on it, stay with it. And that's not true. We've got, I would say, an average of 3 to 4 different major students pick on at any given time. And that's the ability for them to figure out, all right, this is who I want to be, and I want to go in this direction now.
I want to talk about the idea of curiosity here. So when you were talking a little bit earlier, you talked about, I didn't think that education was going to be a path for me in any way.
Right.
But I ended up as the dean of students for a major university. You're a representative and a leader of your organization. When it comes to, students graduating from high school, and the little pun that I like to use is 17, 18-year-old kid graduates from high school. We ask them to make the biggest choice of their life, pick a career, take on debt that maybe we weren't informed about. But yet just 1 month ago, we had to raise our hands to go to the bathroom. Interesting dichotomy. In order for us to truly experience enough and pick a path that we want to go down, we have to be really curious enough to be able to try different things. And so when I think about my process of higher education, I started out as a exercise and sports science major. I then pivoted into communications. I then pivoted into mechanical engineering, and then pivoted back into communications and sociology. And that was the degree that I ended up with. I had to try different things to be able to understand what I really wanted to do. What role are you talking about when students come into a university, how are you inspiring them to be curious about trying different things when there's so much pressure on them to pick a path like we've been talking about?
Yeah, that is a great question. Education should be the atmosphere where learning across the board happens organically and specifically to the student. And so those opportunities should be able to happen for students all the time, where they can sit in the classroom and they can say, you know what, this is a very interesting class. Maybe I would like to pursue this. But if you don't have that overall opportunity, sometimes students just don't know. So like you said, so it sounded like you pivoted 4 times, right? You're like, hey,
Yeah, I did. My parents hated me for it.
and I think that's normal for a lot of students. But it's taking that chance to say, hey, what if I tried this? And what I love about the higher education setting is if it allows for those opportunities to happen, then students can really find what they want to do and be 4 or 5 years down the road. I've met with a lot of students who thought they wanted to be in medical, they wanted to be a doctor, or they wanted to be a lawyer until they took a really difficult class in politics or a medical class, or they had to go to a clinic for the first time. They're like, you know what? Just kidding. I don't want to do that. But until they know, until they have that opportunity for those type of interactions and experiences, then they don't know if they're going to like that or not, or if they want to pursue that. So I hope that when we talk with students, when we're able to meet with them or teach them, that they look for those experiences, those opportunities through different courses. But then when they do pivot, it's not something that they're penalized or then they have to start all over, but they can transition, still continue to take the classes they need, and then move on to where they want to go.
I want to talk about the idea of instant gratification culture that we kind of live in today because of social media and everything else that we see in the headlines, compared to the amount of work that's actually necessary to get things done in life. You know, when I started my business back in 2014, I had a really tough time with my mental health because when I was looking on Instagram and social media, everybody else who had started a business was a millionaire like 2 months later. And I couldn't figure out why I wasn't successful. And then I started realizing that a lot of the things we see out in the echo chamber of instant gratification are often not real. And it takes a substantial amount of work to be able to accomplish anything in life. How are you kind of helping students balance that necessary workload with what it takes to get things done compared to the instant gratification world that we kind of have been brought up in over the last couple of years?
Yeah, that is a huge challenge because we have students who, let's take the athletics portion, for example, okay? At a lot of big time schools, maybe their expectation is because I go to this school and I play a sport, all of a sudden I get these NIL deals and I should be getting, some endorsements or some money or whatever that may look like because they saw it on social media and they see these big time athletes or whatever, they're doing the same thing. So in their mind, just because they're doing something that someone else did, now that they should be able to get those rewards that come with it. And leveling off the expectations versus the realities of, say, higher education or just experience in general is really hard because a lot of students coming into school right now, high school, college, they're basing a lot of things that they're seeing on social media and the success that people have. They don't see the work that's being put into that in order for them to be successful. We didn't have that growing up to where we saw flashes of just achievement and like I made it. And so we understood that there was a process, or at least I felt like I did. Like I knew like in order to be able to get to where I want to be, I got to work for it and it's going to take these steps. So being able to level the expectations for students, especially in school, is something that it's a work in progress, right? I think a lot of professors meet students where they are and then try to help them. Like, hey, you want to be an influencer, but you have a hard time writing an email. So let's start from ground one and let's get to where you need to go, right? But also at the same time, it's, well, what is it that you want to accomplish once you get there? Like, what are you trying to be? You want to be an influencer? Great. So do you have the common skills that even are required to be an influencer? Do you know how to work A, B, and C? Anybody can turn on a camera and start doing those things, but it's everything that goes with it that students just don't see yet that they'll need to do to be successful. So it is curbing a little bit the enthusiasm that they have, like, I want to be a millionaire one day, and that's the only goal I have. Okay, well, then how are you going to get there? Because everybody wants to have money. Everybody wants to have those things to help them in their lives or families. But what are you going to do to be able to establish that as this is what's going to happen moving forward? And that's where sometimes we got to come in and help students. My role, it's also building a rapport so that students know that, hey, I do have questions. I want to be able to be supported in that. I can help mitigate and find ways for them to get the resources that they need. But no question about it, there are students who just think that, hey, because I'm here, I should be able to get this. It's like, well, hold on a second. If you can spell your full name, we're on the right page. Let's move on from there, and then we'll help you out.
It's really interesting. As you were talking a couple minutes ago, I was thinking about the expectation of higher education to meet students where they are in their education process. Mm-hmm. I still have not truly been able to grasp the impact that the pandemic has had on the ability to learn, obtain, comprehend, and be proficient at knowledge and education in general for these students. So what type of things are you kind of seeing with this new generation of students who are coming through kind of the digital wave that they had to be adapted to when the pandemic happened?
So there was some loss of learning that happened during that time, and not having that face-to-face interaction, I think, put a lot of students in an area to where some of those skills, those being able to communicate effectively skills, being able to listen and comprehend what's going on, I think it was lost. And so where are they going to gain that now? If you finished high school in the last couple of years and you go into the job force, I'm sure a lot of people will see that, there might be some of those skills lacking. And so in higher ed, now we take on that opportunity to then help them to be able to now say, okay, we lost some skills during that time. Now we need to help them out.
Have the expectations of students who are graduating, are they different now? It's an interesting question to think about. If you have students who are coming out of high school and they're deficient at certain skills, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say that they're a grade behind where they should be because of the pandemic. What is the expectation of them graduating now? Do you know what I mean? Because when I went to high school, I graduated from an all guys preparatory school. We were incredibly strict academically. And getting into colleges, or some of the colleges like University of Michigan, Michigan State, were highly competitive, and everybody was top notch back in the day. But it seems like there's a lower bar now. So I'm wondering if higher education has to lower their expectation to meet these students where they are.
And there could have been, and there still may be for schools who I know the SAT, ACTs were a priority for a lot of schools. That was a contingent, depending on your school, if we're going to look at that to get you in. And some of them have been not as much of priority, or it will be held against you, right? I would say that the expectation to graduate with I think all universities are held by the same guidelines for a bachelor's degree. You need 120 credits. You need to be able to complete this amount for your coursework in general eds. That hasn't changed. But the way that we're able to help students and understand where they are coming out of school and be able to get them to graduate is, now we grew up in an era, and I think those that are a little bit older, I won't say how old we are, they were pretty much going to school and graduating in about 4 years. That's not the case anymore. For a lot of schools, it takes more than 4 years, 5 or 6 years for an undergrad degree. So now you have students who are in a college setting a little bit longer, if not much longer, and they're getting more schooling now to where maybe they can learn some of those skills, some of those things that they lost. Because let's not forget, it wasn't just the learning that they lost. It was how to interact with one another, how to talk to somebody, how to have conversations. Those skills that are always important and necessary for that next progress, whatever they're doing, those have to be relearned, and they have to be able to be built up so that they can be useful. So it wasn't just academic based. It was, socially, it was mentally and emotionally. Our students mentally prepared for what it takes to go to school, being away from family. Our students ready to do that. You see a lot of students that aren't moving away far from home. They want to be close by. They want to be close to where their parents are, where they came from, because they're not at that place to where can they rely on themselves to do it. So reteaching, helping those students kind of learn some of those things. I think a lot of schools are looking at that. We're seeing that with students, helping them adapt when they do move, helping them be able to be independent, all of the above.
I mean, there's a lot of responsibility that's put on leaders and staff and faculty of higher education to help accelerate these students into a position where they can be successful.
For
You know, I
sure.
would really be interested for you to kind of debunk what does a day in the life of a dean of students look like? Because in our previous conversation, you had mentioned to me often when students come to me, they think that this is purely disciplinary, but
Sure.
often we get a different result. So why don't you kind of break down like the daily responsibilities of a dean of student and some of the stuff that you're doing?
Yeah. So that is a big portion of what I do. I'm over conduct, and so that's a big role that I place on myself, and in my job function. But I'm student facing. I mean, a lot of dean of students, they want to be able to be where the students are. They want to be engaged in helping them build a good rapport and relationship with the students on campus. You, I like to say that we understand the heartbeat of campus through the students, and we've got to know what's going on. And so, yes, while I deal with a lot of conduct issues and things that happen on a daily basis, I could very well be helping a student get through, some issues that they're having with a roommate, or basic needs that we know a lot of students have with finding tutoring or things like that, additional support services, to maybe tending a practice, maybe going to a rehearsal, going to an activity, an event that the school is being held. We're so student facing that I like to be on campus as much as possible to where the students are. That means even eating with the students, just finding where they are, checking in with them, obviously monitoring, making sure everyone's doing what they're supposed to, right? Promoting the code of conduct, making sure everyone understands why we have that, and then just having a good time.
What do you think the biggest challenge higher education is facing right now in 2024? It's an election year. Like I talked about, the sentiment about higher education has been changing over the last couple of years. What do you think is the biggest challenge higher ed as a macro is kind of facing right now?
It's a great question. I would say retaining the students that we have and making sure that their needs are being met, I think, is a big challenge in higher education. And another one is affordability. Uh,
Mm.
as much as you probably know as well, the education that we got, we'll say even 10, 15 years ago, that price change is different than now. And so the affordability of school, as prices have continued to go up nationwide for education, it's a head scratcher for a lot of people. They're looking at that and saying, all right, is this, um, money that we're going to put in, we hoping to get what we get, the work that we put in, the degree that we in, my return on investment, is it going to be there when I obtain this school, especially since students are going a little bit longer. Um, so, like you said, going to an election year, higher education has been a topic where a lot of people have been talking and discussing about debt cancellation and those things. I think schools have a responsibility to make sure that they have clear understandings of what it means for students when they go to school, of pricing, of making sure that this is something that they do want to afford, they can afford, or if scholarships, grants, financial aid, if those things are attainable and usable, are students taking advantage of it? I did read some recently that a lot of students and parents forego even looking into financial aid opportunities because they don't even know how to. And
Mm.
so, are we, just not as educators, but those who have, those responsibilities, are we making it available so that individuals, families know that this is a possibility, that they could be and qualify for, a financial aid or for grants? Those are things I think that students and parents would love to learn more about. And it's really hard to know how different states and areas are doing that, because it's not universal. Everyone's different when it comes to those things.
It's an interesting topic of discussion. I believe in our last conversation, I had brought up another guest who's going to be on the podcast from the University of Washington, Dean of Students. And she talked about how there are more parents involved in the application process than ever, primarily because they recognize that student debt often translates into family debt.
Correct.
And it's an interesting dynamic because when I was coming through school, I went to an all guys preparatory high school to get into college, highly esteemed, but we were not told or taught about financial literacy.
Right.
Nor did my parents really hand down a ton of financial literacy and education to me. And so it makes a lot of sense when students forego the option to even explore financial aid because they don't even know that those resources are there.
Right.
Like you said, do we just need to be better at educating? Do we need to create better opportunities for access? Or what does that look like?
I think it's all the above, and I think it has to start early. In our education system right now, there's a lot of things that we want to focus on, but are we focusing on the right things that are educating our youth to be put in the best possible situations moving forward? Financial literacy and understanding of how that works is something that, let's be honest, you take an economics class here and there in high school, you may take, a class on finances here and there. But it's not the norm, and not every student gets out of it what they should, which is, do you know what debt is? Do you know how to manage a budget? Do you know the reason for having a budget? Those are things that need to be taught early on, because then you build on the skills for, when a student gets their first job. What are they going to do when they get paid? Do they already have bills? I mean, at least my parents, it wasn't talked about what that looks like back in the day. It was like balancing a checkbook. Obviously, we don't do that anymore. But just the idea of understanding what you have in your account, are you spending more than you have? Those are things that students and youth need early on, because then what that does is when there are financial talks, whether it be for, it's not just education, but it's just everyday life. When you get your first job, when you need to buy your first phone, when you want to live on your own, then they have a sense of realness to it, because now they're going to apply those skills. I think far too often we expect that this will come from home. And I think parents struggle with understanding what those look like from themselves. So teaching that is a difficult situation sometimes. And with most of America living paycheck to paycheck, there's a struggle there. But then also, how can schools do better on that side of understanding finances? I think it warrants more of a discussion throughout.
Well, I think you'd be a great leader to start having some of those conversations, Nick. You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to put.
Someone asked me, I'd be happy to talk about it. But I've seen it time and time again where we talk about responsibility as a college student and what that looks like, and not just financial management, but time management. You'd be surprised how many students come in and say, I've really never set a schedule before ever. I don't even know what that looks like. And now we're giving them, class schedule. They got practice schedule. They've got to do this. They've got to be here. And up until, like you said, a couple of days ago, where they're raising the hand to go to the bathroom, mom or dad was taking care of their schedule for them. You need to be here. Make sure you don't miss this. You got this appointment. And now they're doing it on their own. Those type of opportunities and skills should be looked at early on. And, I would even argue middle school, to make sure that that's something that they're building upon every year, so that by the time you're in 12th grade, you're in high school, you're looking to graduate. All right, now you've got a solid foundation and you know how to take care of yourself for these type of things.
I mean, imagine how impactful a course or a class on time management would be, right? Mm-hmm. How to set up your schedule, how to make sure that you're not overextending yourself, how to make sure that you have enough time to do everything that you're putting onto your schedule, and then budgeting your time to be able to accomplish those things. Right. I would definitely appreciate that a little bit more than I'm still waiting to use the Pythagorean theorem at some point in time in my professional life. And I know it's going to come. So I'm still glad that that's burned in the back of my brain somewhere. But time management would have been a little bit more helpful. You know what I mean?
Hey, but we still have those equations memorized. Haven't used it in over 20 years, but you still can recite that. And again, it's looking at education as a whole and saying, are students going to be able to take what they learn and use it? And I think there is, that's education reform, right? When you look at that and saying, how can we model the everyday life of what goes on and adapt that into education? I still think there needs to be more discussion on that financial side. Absolutely, because I don't think there's enough talk on finances. I don't think there's enough talk on debt and what that really means when you go into debt, however that looks like. Because a lot of people think that, or not even think, they just don't know what happens then. Um, and if you look at everything on social media or what's going on, you'll get a lot of different viewpoints of what that is. So just having the basics being taught to you, I think it's important. Really
I
do.
saw a post on Instagram today where this mom was doing a really good job of pointing the finger in a little bit of a razz at her teenage daughter. Daughter's 16 years old. She just went to Sephora and bought a whole bunch of makeup. She opened up her American Express app and said, "Why does the American Express app say that I have to pay them? I already paid for the makeup when I swiped the American Express." And her mom was laughing, but I was thinking to myself, if your daughter doesn't understand that a credit card is credit and that she has to pay it off later in life,
Right.
what type of false environment are you really bringing her up in? Because it's that little bit of understanding of finances is, like we talked about, how to not overextend yourself, how to not spend money when you don't have it in the bank account and find
Right.
yourself in trouble. And I guess you'd rather make those mistakes when you're 16, but those things, if not addressed and just posted on social media, only compound into bigger problems in the future.
Especially when we're talking about interest and we're talking about missed payments and things like that. Look, we know that uh, there's a big um, operation when it comes with credit cards and those kind of things. People see stuff online, they really want it. I'll put it on a credit card. We know credit card debt is something that a lot of people carry. However, what do you do to make sure that you can get out of that debt, right? And like you said, young lady probably had no idea that not only does she have to pay what she paid for at the store, but she's got to pay a little interest. And say she starts making minimum payments, well, now it's going to prolong that a little bit. She's going to be paying a lot more. Um, Definitely not talked about. And I would do even one more. How many parents, how many adults really truly understand those things as well, right? And that is something financial literacy, even amongst adults, I think is something that would be beneficial. Because if you're going to have a hard time teaching a young individual 15, 16 years old, and the parents don't know what to do or how to do it, maybe we start and got to start with the parents too. Because if parents really don't know how that debt is going to affect them, they're certainly not going to be able to teach their young kids, their teenagers, what to do as well.
No, I totally agree with you, man. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the responsibility of higher education to be curious about how we're going to meet these new students where they are.
Yeah.
So, in our last conversation, I believe I shared the statistic: higher education year over year seems to be shrinking at 6%. Online education, as an example, continues to grow at 20% and plus each year. Eventually, there's going to be a crossing, right, of the two different spaces. How can higher education get creative and curious enough to be able to kind of think about how we're going to deliver education in the future to this next generation who's exposed to online learning, information at their fingertips, generative AI, and all the other kind of tools that are out there these days?
Yeah, I really like that question because you're looking at it in two forms because there is a system being built right now where a lot of education is online. We're even seeing schools that are like VR platforms and specifically run for students to interact and operate using virtual reality, which is mind blowing, right? I mean, the thought of even just using a computer back in the day was great, but now they're using virtual reality for an education. Those are some pretty cool advancements. I think there has to be a blend because there will always be a need for individuals to be face to face for interactions and learning how to conduct themselves one with another. And I don't think that's ever going away. In a society and a community as a whole, we need those daily interactions. And there's no better environment to do so than in an education setting where there's hundreds, if not thousands, of different individuals all in one spot, learning how to figure out life, getting along with one another, and then also learning. And so I do still see education having its purpose in being a platform where students can gain that experience. The online education is also very interesting because a lot of students would rather do it from home. It is the convenience of being able to learn at your own time, at your own pace. And I think there's a need for that to continue. However, I think the model for in-person learning from instructors, because the other thing is a lot of students right now learning in high school online can help you to a certain point. But when you really need support from a faculty member or a teaching assistant, you need that in person. You need someone to be able to walk with you, to help you, and to show you what's going on. And I don't think that's going to go away. And I think a lot of students would prefer to meet, to get those needs met face to face with somebody rather than online. But that's just me seeing what the students that I've worked with in the past. They'd rather text you than call you. But if you invite them to come to your office, they would also rather do that, especially if they know that, hey, we're going to help them get to where they need to. And I do see a crossing as well. But if higher education institutions can be innovative with how they will support students and the resources available on campus, I see students continue to go and attend those institutions.
I feel like that is the last foothold, if you will, that higher education has in that argument, which is higher education in itself is about educating you as a student and providing an environment so you can grow. That environment includes the student union, all the conversations you're going to have, having healthy discourse and I would say conflict with different people of different perspectives. You know, the world that we live in today is great from a convenience perspective. And while you were talking about those students who would rather text you, but they'd also rather be in the office to spend time with you,
Sure.
That makes perfect sense. When the pendulum swings towards convenience and digitization,
Right.
everybody gets used to the consumer behavior of being able to do things quickly and efficiently. But there is no replacement for the human element of communication and sitting down across from an amazing team of students like Nick Roberts and
Sure.
then talking about what's going to happen in the future. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's what we need to lean into from a marketing message of higher education a little heavier.
Well, absolutely. And I think when you're able to get help and someone can sit down with you and walk you through, we'll take financial aid for an example, right? A lot of students, they go online, they try to figure out what to do, and it's really hard. But if you have someone by your side and they're really working with you one-on-one, students and parents are going to choose that nine times out of 10 because they get that support that they need. And being able to then ask questions and interact, that is that environment that higher education is. But then it's also building those skills that they're going to use moving forward. Not everybody's going to be able to work online. Not everybody's going to be able to have a job that it's streamlined, just through the internet or through the phone or through emails. There's going to be a lot more individuals who are going to need to be people facing. They're going to be in the communities. They're going to be doing something involving people. So building those skills up are still just as important as getting an education, whether it's online or in person, because it's all those other things that we talk about that are just as valuable. You may have a degree and that paper may say, bachelor's of whatever, but it's also those other skills that you have learned and build upon through meeting others, asking questions, doing hard things, that is going to help you move forward too.
We're at an interesting time in history, both you and I. So I'll disclose my age to everybody who's listening to the podcast. I was born in 1990. And so I consider myself very lucky because I feel like I saw the before time and I saw the technology times, right? I remember when I used to have to call my friends and be like, hey, is Brendan there? Can I talk to him? Before everybody got a cell phone, right? And before the internet and social media.
That's right.
The one thing that I think we're at a unique place in time about is we are seeing how technology can be an accelerator, not a replacement. With the conversation around AI and stuff like this, I talk to a lot of different universities who are looking to put the human back in the human seat. meaning having those pivotal conversations, being able to connect with each other one-on-one, and then letting the technology do things about like answering questions about financial aid or admissions requirements or resources that they can access on campus. I feel like that is a great position for technology today to play in human aiding the human element of higher education. How do you kind of think about technology or AI in aiding the education experience in higher ed?
Well, we know technology and AI, they're not going anywhere, and they're here to stay. They're going to be, becoming more advanced and sophisticated as we know it. And I think that's fine. I don't think we have to shy away from it, but we do have to have an understanding of how we're going to utilize it. It is a tool and it is a resource. And in my experience, there's nothing that can beat an interaction with an individual. I just think there's too much that you can gain from talking with someone or just being in the presence of someone else that can help you moving forward. And so while technology is I mean, I grew up in the day where if we wanted to know, what the weather was going to be like, we had a number we would call on, like, what's the weather going to be like, for the
Yeah.
next day or so we get ready for school or whatnot. I mean, we've come a long way, right? But at the same time, just because you have all the answers on your phone or you can look them up on the internet doesn't mean you know what to do with those answers. There is still an understanding of learning and how to learn and how to progress as an individual to move forward, right? And you can't just get all the answers and then say, all right, I'm good. You've got to have that progress to like, how do I get those answers? And now that I know that process, how can I use that to be adaptable somewhere else? I've seen a lot of students who rely heavily on AI for assignments or whatever they're doing, and their real struggle is how to research, how to study, where to start. Because the first thing they do when they have an assignment is go to the computer and like, all right, how do I do this? And it used to be you have to go to books, you have to talk with people, you have to investigate and study. And now we've kind of lost, for a lot of students coming into online learning or whatever it may be, they've lost that ability to know how to do that. So I'm finding myself teaching students how to study or how to note take. That's not just computer specific, just looking up answers and doing that, but how to investigate themselves, finding real answers that will matter to them.
Man, those critical skills that you develop as being a human
Yeah.
through the higher education process, being able to formulate a plan
Mm-hmm.
of attack, being able to look at certain resources, being able to differentiate if this is valuable to me or not. The one
Yeah.
thing I do worry about when it comes into the level of, AI, I actually just noticed I was working on ChatGPT a little earlier today, and at the very bottom of ChatGPT, they just put a little little phrase in there that says ChatGPT may make mistakes. May make mistakes. So please review the information.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's really interesting because it seems like they would put that in there because people are taking what is the output of ChatGPT as the gospel.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this thing is all knowing and
Right.
it couldn't make mistakes. But you still have
Right.
to leverage that element of, I would say, skepticism, right? Healthy skepticism to be able to understand if this information is legit or not. And that's something I think these future generations are going to become very good at.
Well, we've come to a point to where a lot of students are not wanting to think for themselves. They just want to give you the answers that we think that we want. And we don't want that. We want them to be able to think on their own, take in information, and tell us what's going through their mind, how they would do things, how they would articulate, this piece that we read or whatever it is. That's interesting. I haven't seen that yet, but it's not surprising either because we see a lot of students take everything that is online as like that's the gospel. That's everything. Like it's real. It's 100% legit. No questioning it. And it could be concerning that they don't ask questions. Is that right? Just because you read it doesn't mean it's 100% correct. So always, fact checking, looking at your sources. Where is it coming from? Some students have never understood the concept of other sources could say something that is contrary to what you found originally. The first thing they looked up, oh, that's it. That's what I'm going with, and there's nothing else. And so, yeah, finding ways for them to learn how to do that is something that I think every school is looking at, saying, all right, how can we better help our students do those things?
Yeah, we often in society today confuse popularity for authority. Just because
Sure.
something has a million likes does not
Yeah.
mean that it is accurate. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Have you ever heard of Churchillian drift before?
I have not. I have not.
Okay. So Winston Churchill has
Okay.
been praised as coming up with all these phrases,
Okay.
right? You say something and it was like said by Winston Churchill. And it's
Sure.
interesting because one of the things they found in large language models in the very beginning was there would be quotes that would be output by the system. And because there are so many different versions and iterations of what Winston Churchill said, they
Mm,
would start marking it as a quote by Winston Churchill. And so they
okay.
call it Churchillian drift
Okay.
because often we give citing to a person who said these things, but they never did. And
Right.
it's a really interesting way in which if you have too much information, if one system claims it as something, like you said, it's taken as the gospel instead
Right.
of being critical enough to say, I don't think he really said that the A's were going to win the Western Conference. You know what I mean? It's just an interesting little perspective.
That's right.
Um,
Yeah. But they're like 15 games behind. Yeah. Like, look, they got some work to do. But no, you're right. Understanding where your information comes from is just as important as using that for reporting purposes. I used to have a quote that says "Never, never, never quit" from Winston Churchill. And who knows if he actually really said that or if it's what that really happened. But it is interesting because that's where a lot of misinformation happens. But then the question is, does anyone question it? Does anyone look into it and say, did this really happen? Did this person really say this? Is that something that was a reality, or was it just information that was put together? And that's what they're telling us right now.
You're 1,000% right, man. It's an interesting time, but I'm glad that we have leaders like you who are ushering in and guiding this next generation of critical thinkers to be able to be the next generation of our country who are going to make the biggest difference. And it just makes me feel a lot more sound when we have grounded leaders like you who are willing to do what's necessary to help round out this next generation.
Yeah.
My last question for you
Yeah.
comes from another guest on the podcast.
Okay.
Their question was simple, but I'd love to hear your answer. What is happiness to you?
Oh, that is a great question. Happiness is knowing that I can be with my family, knowing that I can be with the individuals who I love and care for, and being true to myself, and just really enjoying the things that life has to offer. Happiness is always such a unique when you look at it, because I feel like a lot of people think that happiness should come because of X, Y, and Z. But I found a lot of happiness and even joy too, and even hardships, hard things, knowing that they're going to end, and how much more sweeter it's going to be when that is done. Sometimes life for me, it looks like that. I can still be happy even though, things are not going how I want. But because I know I'm grounded in things that matter to me most, I'm still happy. So that's a really good question. I love that. I'm actually going to use that now as a introductory question for my students here in a couple of weeks. See
Dude, you
what
really
they think
should.
of that too.
You really should.
I like that question.
It's interesting because, and you answered it perfectly, because one of the misconceptions that we have in society today is that you said it again. Happiness is often tied to certain criteria, right? Mm-hmm. Expectations that we have for certain things happening that make us happy, right? Or outside of our control.
Sure.
I was listening to a podcast the other day with this guy who was incredibly successful. He used to be the head of Google X. And so I'm talking about like multi-millionaire guy, right?
Yeah.
He was talking about when I think of happiness and I ask people a similar question, mm-hmm. they often say, it's the time I spend with my family. It's the time when I pour into others. It's when I do right by myself. It's when I'm honest. It's when I'm, integrous. It's never when I bought the Lamborghini or when I got the new Tesla. Do you know what I mean? And I'm worried that society in itself continues to push that image when we all know truly deep down inside of us that that isn't true.
Yeah.
And you absolutely killed it. Here's another. Let's take this a little bit further.
Okay.
What is, would you, how do I want to frame this? So everybody has had horrible situations happen in their life, tragedies, loved ones have passed away, all of those type of things. I want you to picture a bad moment in your head, and I want you to think about, would you, if you could, erase that experience from your life? But in erasing that experience, you also erased everything that happened as a consequence of it. Conversations, family members reaching out to you, deepening of relationships, friends that you might have met. Would you eliminate that bad experience in your life if it meant everything else that came as a domino effect of it also went away?
Yeah, what a great question. This is a simple answer. I'm going to say no. And two parts, two reasons. One is you don't become the person that you want to be just from all the easy things that happen in life. And part of that is because we know there's an opposition to everything that we do, good and bad. We really truly can't know true happiness if we don't know the really bad things or the really hard times. And so everything is defined by the experiences that we go through and really who we are. But if you don't have those really sucky, bad experiences, then we're not really progressing and working on ourselves to be the best versions that we can be. I've looked at a lot of students, for example, who've been really good examples of overcoming a lot of difficulties in their lives. They probably would never have traded those difficulties to where they are now because they never would have realized that they need to move forward or aim higher. And so I wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't trade any bad experience. Although going through them, that's a different conversation, how you're feeling when you're going through them. But I've learned over the years that if you have a mindset that, this too shall pass, right? That this is a small moment within a lifetime, it helps ease the burden that this is going to be all right. You're going to come out stronger. And we're all about that. Let's take care of that.
Everybody, thank you once again, Nick Roberts, for being an amazing guest on the Hart Hustle podcast, man. You absolutely killed it. And that is a perfect place for us to wrap. Thank you so much. We'll catch you in the next one.